Alrighty, good evening, everyone. It's meteorologist First Weather here. It is December 17th, 2024, and it's been a pretty cold start to the month of December here. Just starting off looking at the 14-day mean temperature anomalies for the lower 48, we can see that there's a pretty solid section of 2 to 4 degrees below average temperatures for the eastern coast. In fact, I saw a recent tweet from BAM Weather showing that parts of the Ohio Valley and Midwest saw their coldest first week of December since records began, I think in like 1893. So, regardless, a pretty cold start to the month of December, that's for sure. This trend should moderate a little bit. We're going to see a pretty substantial warm up. It wouldn't surprise me if we even see some record breaking highs over the next couple of weeks before we see a return to cooler weather after that period as well. Looking at the surface map right now, this is just kind of the latest as to what's going on. So we have a weak little cold front coming through right now. This will help cool down our temperatures a little bit from the relatively mild conditions we saw today, but it'll take some time for that cooler air to really work its way down. You see that the real cold front or cold air is really kind of around Indiana, Illinois, not really quite up to speed yet in the eastern seaboard. If we take a look at the fronts map here too, now we can go and see what kind of happens as we go through time. So this is right now, again, that cold front comes through. And then a secondary cold front comes through on Wednesday, so that should spark some showers and storms, mostly showers for the eastern coast. That comes through, and we do see a pretty serious cool down here. This is that cold air that we're going to see for the next 4 or 5 days, and then after that is the substantial warm up, which I was just talking about a few seconds ago. And this cold air outbreak should be about last about 3 to 4 days. Should linger a bit longer on the eastern coast. High temperatures running 10 to 15 degrees below average, mostly on the lower side of that range. So we're talking highs in the low to mid 30s for the Mid Atlantic, and colder obviously as you go further north into the Northeast. So not record breaking cold by any stretch of the imagination, but below average conditions or to well below average conditions in some areas. With with this being an Arctic outbreak, so you will see cold overnight lows, etc. Now, if we take a look here at the GFS, just to go through time here, just to show you what's going on, this is the 12Z run, and we see that we have this is the associated cold front coming through tomorrow, 18Z Wednesday. So some light snows maybe in the interior northeast. This won't really amount to much. There's not really any antecedent cold air in place. You have to go up to Vermont and Maine to really see anything substantial from this. Then after that, a clipper system actually comes through. This should lose a lot of its steam as it gets further east, but should maybe spark off a few snow showers and flurries on the eastern seaboard and the interior New England. And then what might really catch our attention is this little low pressure system right over here. Oh, let me see if I can get the brush going. There we go. This low pressure right here, actually, this was just about 500 miles or 300 miles further west. You're talking a pretty substantial snowstorm for much of the East Coast. And some of the models a few days ago were getting quite excited about, some snowstorm potential during the December 19th through 22nd time frame. But it's not quite working out. The mean trough is a bit too far east, and by the time that low forms, it's well off. It's well offshore. So looking like a near miss here, but just because it's offshore doesn't mean you're not going to see some weather from this. You're going to see snow showers, even maybe some steadier snow. Well, on the eastern part of Massachusetts, Nantucket could see some snow showers potentially, but not a major snowstorm by any means. If I just go back through the previous GFS runs, you can see why there was some excitement about a storm. There's always been something lingering around. The model is showing something, even some pretty substantial colder outbreaks. Here it shows some more widespread snow. Let me see if I can go further back. Yeah, you can see. So there's been hints of for a while now of something potentially taking place, but the threat really did kind of fizzle out here as we got closer and closer. You might also notice that the magnitude of the cold also weakened a little bit. Previous GFS runs had 540 thickness lines a bit further south, but recent runs have shown that cold air really be kind of confined to northern portions of the U.S. with temperature anomalies moderating just a little bit here. Still going to be cold, but not as cold as previously thought. Now, if we take a look at the 500 millibar geopotential height and cyclonic vorticity map, this can kind of give us a better detail of why we're seeing that near miss. So if we go right now, this is currently Tuesday, so then that cold front comes through on Wednesday. You can see if these two short waves have really nicely combined, you might have seen a pretty good snow actually for the Midwest and interior New England, but that wasn't to be. Then here comes that Clipper system that was a lot. That was a lot of chatter about this. That Clipper system will come through, providing a pretty good swath of snow, I think, for uh, traditional areas here. Snowpack is a bit lacking in this area, so that should help keep things, help to reinvigorate some snowpack for those localities. And then provide some, mood snow to, maybe a 1 to 2 couple inches of snow in the interior northeast, talking places like Buffalo, Syracuse, Ithaca might see a little bit from this, but really nothing to write home about. Now, that trough, as it approaches the eastern seaboard, what I want you to notice here is the tilt of this. So the trough is negatively tilted, or sorry, positively tilted. You want to see a negatively tilted trough to really get cyclogenesis, to see, vorticity advection really ramp up, and to see a storm really deepen and intensify. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Your ridge right here is basically east of California. You want this to be a little bit further west to allow this trough to dig in more, and to deepen. And also, ideally, when you have a ridge that's right over the western U.S., you want it to be a bit more amplified. That would allow this to dig in further and reach its negative tilt earlier. But that's unfortunately not the case for any snow lovers out there. So then, as that goes through, it reaches neutral tilt. Let me get the right thing. It reaches neutral tilt on 60 Saturday, and it's already off the coast. So that low forms right here, and so its precip shield is just off the coast. So that's going to mean a pretty substantial snow for Nova Scotia, but not the Northeast in all likelihood. As we go after that, again, we have some cold air in place, just for a few days. Then by Tuesday, Wednesday, things should start to moderate here. See a pretty significant shortwave and trough over the west coast. That should help to flood in the eastern U.S. with mild Pacific air. And then by the 28th, we're looking very warm for much of the eastern U.S. Big ridge over the east coast, pumping in warm air from the Gulf of Mexico, temperatures being above to maybe even well above average for the region. Now, if we take a look at temperature anomalies, that also reflects nicely. So we have the initial warm up for Tuesday and Wednesday. Some seasonable air comes in, then cold air comes in behind it. The core of the cold really focused on the Northeast, and less than previously anticipated. If we go through previous runs, you can see that the magnitude of that cold air was a bit more severe. That has moderated as of recently. And then after that cold goes through, we do start to see that moderating pattern. We're actually right around Christmas time. We will have some persistent CAD, it looks like. So areas in the Mid-Atlantic and coastal New England will see those colder temperatures linger for just a bit longer. So you might see temperatures near to slightly below average for Tuesday, Wednesday before Christmas. While other areas just to the west start to see a significant warming of temperatures before that. You can see temperatures running 20 to 30 degrees above average in Canada and also most of the U.S. So very warm heading up to Christmas, and it looks like in all likelihood. And that warmth then finally overspreads the U.S. You can see very warm conditions in Canada. In fact, if we go to the North America view, we can see just essentially a torch pattern with extremely warm conditions over all of Canada and the U.S. Big time ridge, Hudson Ridge right here, pumping in lots of warm air. If we look at the upper air height anomalies, we can see that nicely. Boom, there you go. So just complete ridging over Canada, big Aleutian low, and that just essentially floods the U.S. with warmth. We have a nice little Pacific jet extension here. This is the Pacific jet. We have a poleward shift as well, and that just floods the entire place with warmth. And as you go past that as well, we can see the GFS then continues that ridge, retrogrades it to the east, and then we see a bit of a change in the pattern here as we get to January with a ridge building in Alaska and some troughing returning to the east coast. This, of course, is an operational run, so can't really take too much from this for the long term, but I think it is pretty set in stone now that after this initial cold shot that we see here with this trough on the screen, let me draw it out for you. So after this trough goes through, we see that initial cold shot. And then after that, we see some residual cold and some below average temperatures for up until around Saturday, Sunday. You can see here the confluence of the iso heights, so that indicates high pressure here, cold air coming in from Canada, keeping things below average, especially for the eastern coast leading up to Christmas. But then just a couple of days before Christmas, we start to see a significant warm up taking place, big ridge over Canada, and that pumps in the warm air. And it also wouldn't surprise me to see that if we do in fact see a severe weather outbreak, a cold front coming through with storms as well because of just how warm it is. When you eventually do see that cold front come through, there's going to be a lot of instability to work with for sure. And so you can see on the GFS that big ridge starts to really take place after the 23rd. So definitely look to see a significant warm up after around the 22nd and 23rd for the East Coast here. And again, I think the biggest temp anomalies will be located right in Canada and then pretty much the entire eastern US as well. There might be some cool pockets right along the western coast, but besides that, no one else really is going to see anything but very warm conditions. Now, if we switch gears here to the EPS, so this is the ensemble of the ECMFWF model. This right here can give us a better idea of what the general consensus or thoughts are for the pattern after Christmas. So it's already set in stone that we're relatively confident that there's going to be a big warm up after the 22nd for the eastern coast and pretty much all of North America. The EPS here shows that nicely, well above average height anomalies for Canada right here, big Hudson Ridge pumping in that warm air. But then after that, we see that's when things might start to change, and I'll get into that in a minute. And the reason for that is the MJO, or the Madden-Julian Oscillation. So up until about the 27th, 28th, again, very unfavorable pattern for any sort of cold in the eastern U.S. Pretty much no wintry weather at all. Big trough over Alaska, big ridge over eastern North America, strongly positive NAO. Nothing really going for, or not positive NAO, but just very zonal flow and just warmth, essentially. However, after that is when things might get interesting. As we go into January and even into late December, we start to see a bit of a return to maybe potentially favorable conditions to what we were seeing in the first week of November. First of all, we see a negative EPO pattern / positive PNA pattern taking place. We have a nice little ridge over the western U.S. That might help to establish some cross-polar flow. We start to see some mean troughing taking place over the eastern U.S. That big Aleutian low that was previously there shifts a little bit further westward. The jet stream also retracts to the west, helps to minimize the flooding of the lower 48 with warm Pacific air. And so it remains to be seen what happens. I do want to caution, however, that the end run of an ensemble is essentially it returns to climatological averages, right? Because after about 15 days, it's chaos theory. You have just all sorts of solutions, and so the average will always return to the climatological mean. And generally during winter, you tend to see higher heights in the west and troughing in the east, but this still is a signal, I think, from the EPS model. It does show the return of ridging out west. This would not be a torch pattern. This would be, seasonable to maybe slightly below average conditions on the eastern coast. Now, if we go to the GEFS model, it kind of paints a similar story. So very warm conditions initially, big trough over Alaska. Then we start to see that shift with the ridging retrograding back to the west, going back to Alaska, some troughing starting to develop or trying to take place over the eastern U.S. Kind of remains to be seen what happens though. But I'll explain later in this video why I do think after that significant warm up, we will see a return to maybe some cooler conditions for the eastern U.S. As we get past Christmas, and especially after New Year's, I think is when we could really start to see some cooler weather, and maybe the return of wintry weather for areas east of the Mississippi. And the reason, again, as I said, was the MJO. So this right here is the Australian forecast, the BOMM model, from the 15th through the 13th. So right now we are in phases 5, and the MJO phase 5. This is an unfavorable phase for any sort of wintry weather in the eastern U.S., and especially phase 6. Now the model kind of here meanders it through phase 5 into phase 6, then into the circle of death. It remains to be seen what exactly will happen, but I think the overall circulation of the MJO will go through 5, 6, and then kind of into 7, a little bit into 8, or maybe into the circle of death. That progression, in my opinion, is key as to what happens in the next few weeks. So if the MJO goes into phase 6, then goes into the circle of death, and sort of really collapses, then we may not see as strong of a signal to return to cooler weather in January over the eastern US. On the other hand, if it does stay stronger, if the MJO pulse goes through phase 7, phase 8, before then weakening, I think we would see a substantial period of cooler and potentially more wintry weather for the United States. This right here is the European extended MJO forecast. So the greens and blues are the day 15 and day 20 forecast. This model also does show a progression from phases 5 and 6. So look at phase 6. Phase 6 is on day 10, which is around the 25th, 27th. And as expected, that period is supposed to be very warm. Phase 6 has a very strong correlation with above average temperatures for the eastern portions of North America. After that, however, you see that transition to phases 7, 8 in the circle of death. If that were to take place, that again would support a return to cooler weather and cooler conditions. Now, this is also supported by the MJO constructed analog here. So this is a tool developed by the University of Albany, and it kind of shows what the favored geopotential height anomalies are based on the constructed MJO analog. So it looks at the MJO, the low level frequencies, the background state, and says what is the favored pattern looking just at the tropical state. And this is what we see here. So right now the MJO is not favoring a very cool pattern. It favors ridging over the eastern US, and that continues well into Christmas here. So you can see that big Hudson Bay Ridge over Canada right here. Not really any sort of cross-polar flow, but that does start to break down as we head closer into the New Year's. I think this might be a bit too fast, but you can see here by the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, we start to see that ridge retrograding west. And this is exactly what the European ensemble and the GEFS ensemble were showing around New Year's time, with that ridge slowly going west to Alaska. So before, that ridge was not there. You had a strong trough over Alaska, and that's what the models show right now. And because of that, you have unabated warm air transport to the eastern US, so very warm conditions. Once that trough breaks down and that ridge goes further west, that is what can allow then for troughing to develop over the eastern US. And the MJO constructed analog here shows that quite nicely. Right around January, you start to see a very favorable pattern. If this were to verify, this would be a very favorable pattern for for East Coast winter weather here. Ridging in Alaska, substantial troughing here in the eastern US. So just something to note. And as we go through time, the MJO constructed analog stays in that way up until about middle to late January. So pretty interesting to note there as well. This right here is the European extended range forecast of the MJO. This is looking at velocity potential at 200 hectopascals. So you can see right here, this is a Hofmüller diagram. Right now we're at the black line. So we have westerly trade winds in red and easterly trade winds in green. This is velocity potential. So the green right here indicates rising motion at the surface. And so as you can see here, this MJO line is projected to sort of just gradually move east with time here as we get into late December and January. And look where that is. That's right over phases 8, 1, and 2. And that would again support the transition to a colder regime for the eastern US. Now, if we take a look here at the MJO correlations with negative ENSO, so phase 8 right here, I think it's very striking what the ensembles are showing. You see that ridging over Alaska and just to the east, and that troughing set taking place over the eastern US. Now, this is a very stormy and active pattern. If we can get that MJO pulse to go into phase 8, we will see, I think, a return to very wintry weather. Now, I want to show you here the similarity between the MJO phase 8 composite and what the GFS and the European are showing. This is the European for late December and early January. Look at the ridge over Alaska and to its east and the troughing over the eastern US. And look at the MJO composite. It's very similar, at least with what the Pacific is showing. So I think the models here, especially the ensembles, are picking up on that MJO progression and are leaning on that base state as we get closer to the end of the month. Phases 1 and 2 are not as robust, but still relatively cold patterns. Phase 1 has the return of a bit of ridging here. This is phase 2. And phase 1, again, also still has some troughing, still stormy. Phase 2 is when things start to break down just a little bit. But again, overall, phases 8, 1, and 2 is what you want to see for the increased chances of winter weather on the East Coast. Now, if we take a look here at the European Weekly, so this was released on December 16th. These are the long-range extended weekly mean anomalies of geopotential height, and what the model shows just kind of aligns with what the ensembles and the MJO are saying. So I think there's kind of an alignment here in the forecast. So first, again, very warm. This is for the week of the 23rd of December through the 30th. The model is quite warm. Big ridge. So this is all your prototypical torch pattern as a weather weenie would put it. Now, after that, things start to break down a little bit. This is the 30th of December through January 6th. As the EPS shows, that ridging shifts west, some troughing starts to develop over the East Coast. Over from January 6th to the 13th of January, you have a pretty broad area of troughing, a troughing signal showing up on the European weeklies, and a positive PNA pattern. This would support winter weather. Ideally, you want to see that trough a bit further west. As we saw in the first week of December, the main reason we didn't really see any winter weather during that pattern was that the mean ridge was too far east and it was too broad. You want to see it to be higher amplitude and further west, so cyclogenesis and storm formation can occur on the eastern coast rather than offshore. But again, I think this shows you the kind of alignment with the models here. It continues to show below average height anomalies through the month of January before we finally start to see some sort of semblance of a pattern breakdown at the end of the month. Now this right here shows these associated precip anomalies. So will the pattern be dry and cold or wet and cold? As we go through that time, when we get to that sort of active pattern, I think this is very interesting. So from the 30th through the 6th of January, we can see that we actually do have above average precip forecast or a signature kind of showing up on the eastern coast. And this is kind of what you want to see. You want to have that baroclinic zone here showing up on the east coast, allowing storms to form. And so with this above average precip signal here, let me clear this out for you. So what you want to see is that baroclinic zone taking place here and storms kind of riding up this. And so that would kind of give you an above average precip signal here and then snows in this area here. So that's kind of the ideal setup you would like to see. And I'm encouraged by the fact that the European weeklies are in alignment with the ensemble, with the MJO, and they're showing that above average precip signal and confining the below average precip well to the north. This right here is a quick chart showing the weather regime frequency. This kind of is just sort of a warning to anyone who wants to get too confident about what might happen in January. There still is a lot of uncertainty. You can see we have a positive NAO to a block to a negative NAO to pretty much no regime, right? So this is not set in stone by any means. Yes, I think we are going to see a much higher chance to return to more wintry weather at the end of the month, and especially in the first week of January, but it's not set in stone. One quite prominent meteorologist on Twitter, Judah Cohen, who has a great blog on AER weather risk, was just talking today and on Monday about how some operational models are showing a Canadian warming, which is when the polar vortex warms significantly over Canada, and that is correlated with very warm conditions over the eastern U.S. So again, just goes to show that there is quite a bit of uncertainty here, but I'm leaning right now on cold for the next 4 or 5 days, significant warm up after that up until about New Year's Day, and then the first week of January is when that big transition takes place, where we see return to troughing, and I think the best chance for an East Coast snowstorm or increased wintry weather or snow, especially for the Mid Atlantic, is going to be the first 3 weeks of January. I think that window is the key time period for when we might see something. And then I think after that, the Southeast Ridge returns for February, and we see snow chances kind of shift to the interior New England, Midwest, Ohio Valley region. This right here is the GFS operational. Taking a look at the stratosphere here, 10 millibars, geopotential height anomalies. So right now we have a pretty strong polar vortex actually. It's a big donut hole, nothing really taking place in terms of warming significantly. But as we go through time, we can see that it continues to weave and stretch a little bit, as has been the theme this year. And at the end of the run, the model does show some stretching taking place. So again, the polar vortex is another key variable I think that will be very important to keep kind of track. Um, no significant warmings or splitting events, looking likely anytime in the near future, as we are at that net record strength territory. But even just a wobble or a stretching of the vortex can influence the weather downstream in the troposphere. So something to also keep an eye on as well. This right here is the European 10 hectopascal zonal wind. So you can see for this time of year right now, the polar vortex is at near record strength. And it's projected to stay that way up until about the end of the year, before the European, interestingly, actually shows a pretty significant weakening signal. That is something that it needs to be monitored as well. If we can get that polar vortex to weaken, we might see some more interesting weather at play. A meteorologist on Twitter, Eric Webb, who has some brilliant analysis, was also suggesting that a stronger polar vortex might be better for winter weather prospects on the East Coast, as we have in previous positive QBO winters. A strong polar vortex coupled with the Hudson Bay tropospheric vortex and allowed for colder conditions on the eastern coast, which is a bit counterintuitive, but I think that just goes to show that there's different scenarios here that can lead to different outcomes. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, finally, I wanted to close by talking about what I think this winter could evolve as. I had a few analog winters or analog years for my winter forecast. I think 2017, 2018 does have some resemblance. December 2017 had a colder December as well, but not overwhelmingly cold. Not a polar vortex split or SSW. And that month did feature a colder January. You had cross polar flow, you had ridging in the west, you had some snow events in the mid Atlantic and Northeast, and then February returned to the famous, the hated Southeast Ridge and troughing in the western U.S. So as of now, I think that's how the winter is most likely going to fare out. The first 3 weeks of January, I think, are the main window for winter weather over the eastern U.S. before the return of the Southeast Ridge in late January to early February, which would really kind of shut down any wintry weather for the Southeast and Mid Atlantic. Should keep things alive for the Northeast and Midwest and Western U.S., but I think for areas south of Richmond or D.C., the Southeast Ridge in February should really keep things on a lid. So that's all I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Please feel free to leave any questions, comments in the comment section below. And yeah, well, it should be interesting to track what happens over the next few weeks. I think the key thing over the next couple of weeks is watching the MJO progression. Based on how that pulse moves to the Pacific, that'll be a key role or play a key role in determining how significant the cold and winter weather is for the month of January. So stay tuned.